Hello, everyone. So thank you for coming along to try and understand the NDIS access process. So first of all, we're just going to start by talking about the very early parts of trying to establish whether you can try and apply for access to the NDIS. But before we do that, I'll just introduce myself. I'm Lisa Duffy. I work as the NDIS support manager at Fighting Chance Australia. So I'm based in Sydney in New South Wales. However, because the NDIS is a national scheme, I can work with you from wherever you are across Australia. So an access request is just the fancy language of really making an application. So this is you saying, I would like to be considered to access the NDIS and hopefully become a participant of the NDIS. So there are some initial criteria that need to be met before we start talking about disability, and that's around age and residency. So you first need to meet the age and residency criteria before the NDIS will then consider evidence around your disability requirements or early intervention requirements. So what are they? You need to be under the age of 65 while you're applying to access the scheme. You also need to be someone who's living in Australia and is either a citizen of Australia, a permanent resident, or someone who holds a protected special category visa. So this slide here explains the protected special category visa, if that relates to you. And if you do feel like you pass these age and residency requirements, then that's when we can start talking about the next steps, which is around considering eligibility around disability requirements. So we're going to do that next. Okay, so you've passed the age requirements and you've passed the residency requirements. So now we need to start looking at disability requirements when looking at eligibility for the scheme. So you need to be able to show that you have a disability that's attributable to an intellectual, cognitive, neurological, sensory or physical impairment. And also it needs to be shown that these impairments are likely to be permanent and lifelong. So we also then need to show that these impairments or these diagnoses, these disabilities lead to a substantial reduction in your functional capacity in at least one of these 6 domains that you can see on the screen. So communication, social interaction, learning, mobility, self-care and self-management. And we're going to talk about all of those 6 domains in a little bit. So yes, like I was saying, you've met the age and residency criteria, and now let's dig deeper into whether you then should continue with the process around disability criteria. So when we're looking at whether someone may be able to consider, an application to the NDIS or an access request, like I was saying, we first need to show that you have a diagnosed disability or impairments where the impairments are likely to be permanent and lifelong, and also that there's a substantial reduction in your functional capacity because of those impairments. Also, you need to be able to show that these impairments affect your social and economic participation. And like I was saying, that these will impact you for your life. So there are lifelong and permanent impairments. Another way that people can attempt access to the scheme is around early intervention. So this is where when the access team at the NDIS looks at the potential trajectory of your impairments or disability, they look at whether there are benefits to intensive early intervention on your lifelong functional capacity. So when we are saying disability, what does the NDIS consider when we say that? So they say it's a reduction or loss of an ability to perform an activity, which results from an impairment. So therefore, what's impairment? So impairment commonly refers to a loss of or damage to a physical, sensory or mental function. So if we then take a narrower definition of disability, this is where the NDIS is really targeting to support people with disability who have a significant impairment to their functional capacity. So this slide here is just reminding us about permanency. So having to show that the disability is lifelong and permanent. So this can be shown only if there are no known, available and appropriate evidence-based treatments that would likely cure the impairment. So even if the impairment does vary in intensity and, you may have really good weeks, or more challenging weeks or months or years, you can still gain access on permanency. So your disability impairments do not need to be the same every day or constantly be increasing to be able to be eligible around disability permanency. So even if you do have symptoms that do improve or fluctuate, that's okay, as long as a treating professional in your life can show that your diagnosis or your impairments are permanent and lifelong. So this is why when we look at the application form soon, you'll see there are questions around whether there are any treatments that haven't been tried yet, or if any could potentially, change the permanency and have a curative nature. And this is because the NDIS is really trying to see, are we the best support system for you, or other existing government services that can actually support you? So already existing things like the health service, your local health district, mental health services, community-based services. So the NDIS is trying to see if your current challenges or impairments are not lifelong and permanent, then they may be more appropriately supported by other government streams. Okay, I've been talking about this concept of reduced functional capacity, so we're going to go into that in more detail now. Okay, so we've had a look at impairments and diagnoses, and we've had to think about permanency and whether the impairments, although they may fluctuate, we've now considered that yes, they are lifelong and permanent, but now we need to be able to show and satisfy the NDIA that any impairments will lead to a significant reduction in your functional capacity. So we're now going to dig into that a bit more and how we can show that in the access request. So when we look at the 6 domains, we'll go through them one at a time now. To show reduced functional capacity in communication, examples may include that you have a reduced functional capacity around being understood, or also understanding others. So this could be in spoken word or written or sign language, gestures, non-verbal communication, and really there needs to be examples of how your functional capacity is reduced, with really great individualized examples around communication. Social interaction may show a reduced functional capacity if you're able to show that because of your impairments, you have difficulties in making or maintaining friendships or relationships, that you have a reduced capacity to interact with your community, that maybe the way that someone is behaving in a social context is challenged or different when comparing socially accepted limits, and also the person's ability to cope with their feelings and emotions in a social context. And this is where some people do like to raise whether they do have social isolation, or if they are isolating themselves because of their impairments. So learning, if you can show a reduced functional capacity in learning, it's that you can show that there's a reduced ability to understand and remember information, including learning new things, practicing new skills, and also maintaining and retaining that information. This is a really good place for you to provide examples of how maybe learning has been modified for you. So, an example of where you might get evidence of reduced functional capacity in learning is if you've been attending school and you have additional learning support in the classroom, or in your employment if you've required new information to be delivered to you in a pictorial form or with task and process breakdown. So it's really great to include really specific individual examples in this section. So mobility, it does not just relate to someone's ability to move their body. It does include that, but it also includes whether the person has a reduced functional capacity to, undertake activities of daily living, transfers, such as getting in and out of bed, on and off chairs, and also their independence in moving about in their community. So this is where people can talk about their confidence and skills and independence or dependence on other people in regards to using public transport, moving about the community. If you do try and access a new part of your community and if you got lost, would you then know how to find your way back? So really looking at all aspects of your ability to move around your community, not just the movement of your body. So looking at self-care, it does include things related to personal care and hygiene, toileting, feeding oneself and grooming. But it also relates to whether, even if you can physically do the tasks, are you dependent on prompts and reminders and routines? And if you weren't reminded or prompted to do the grooming or hygiene tasks, you wouldn't do it, even if you physically are capable of doing it. So don't just think about, can I wash my hair physically? It's also around, do I require or am I dependent on someone else to remind me to do that? Self-management is really around, your ability to manage your life admin. So capacity to manage your life, budgeting, mail, emails, forms, and things like solving problems and making decisions. So when does an impairment result in substantially reduced functional capacity? So we've had a look at those 6 domains, and now we need to look at how do we actually show that those domains are impacted. So this is where we need to show that perhaps in those domains, we cannot actually participate in that domain unless we have assistive technology or equipment or home or environmental modifications, or unless we have support from other people. Now, this doesn't have to just be physical support. It also is, like I was saying, prompting, guidance, supervision, reminders. And also another way to show significant reduction in functional capacity is if you can state that you actually are not able to do those things. So unable to participate in activities relating to that domain. Now, just wanting to say that if you see these links here, there are some List A and List B conditions on the NDIS website. So this is where List A conditions are those that have been determined as conditions that are likely to meet disability requirements according to a part of the NDIS legislation. List B are conditions which have been shown to have permanency. However, functional capacity and reduced functional capacity still needs to be shown by evidence. So the links are there if you get those slides, and that will hopefully help you to see if what you're listing as your primary diagnosis may already be considered in one of those lists. So what I'd like to do now is actually pull up the NDIS access request form. But before that, I'll just go through a couple of notes around evidence in general. So the access request form looks like this. So it's a 28-page, very purple document, and it's something that upon on your initial look might seem overwhelming because it's quite long. However, I find that this version of the access request form, which actually is only, I think around February, March 2021, it does a really good job of, really spelling out questions that help you and your treating professionals to provide the evidence that's required to show permanency and significant functional capacity reduction. Oops, sorry about that. So just before we get to the form, what is actually considered good evidence? So we need to have recent evidence that's completed by treating professionals in your current life. So people who understand your primary diagnosis and who are able to actually comment on your functional capacity. So there may be some people in your life or specialists or therapists who may not have seen you very many times, or it's been a long time, or they may not feel like they know you well enough to comment on the functional capacity reduction because of your impairments. So you just need to really have a think about who knows me, what treating professionals in my life actually know me well enough to comment. So we do need to have confirmation of diagnosis, and we do need to have a treating professional who is able to say that your diagnosis is lifelong and permanent. But also, as I've said in this last point here, the evidence needs to assume nothing and explain everything. And that's because many of the people who are making decisions at the National Disability Insurance Agency may not necessarily be coming to us with experience in the sector or with qualifications in allied health or disability. So we need to just explain everything so that they can understand your personal circumstances. So evidence is really important, but it's also important for me to to, I guess, let you know around the considerations of how this can be really quite a time-intensive process, and also could include cost. Because if we're asking treating professionals for documentation or supporting evidence, they may charge you for their time in assisting with this process. So this booklet here is also something I just wanted to show that if you Google NDIS booklet 1, this is what will come up, and it'll be a PDF that you can download. And it's quite a good, helpful booklet that really does go into the detail of eligibility and the process of making an application. So I do recommend that you download it and use that in your process. But what I'll do now is share the new link, which is the access request form. Okay, here it is now. So the first section is for you to fill in as the potential applicant. So a lot of this is around your name, your gender, your address, information around your consent to share information, and whether the agency can speak to related other agencies such as Centrelink. So we'll just skip through here. It goes through some of the questions we've just looked at around eligibility for age and citizenship, and then your consent for privacy. Contact methods, and this section here is if someone else is filling in the form on your behalf. So page 10 is where the access request form is asking for an overview of your disability. So this is where you need to make a choice of your main disability. So your primary disability is the one that has the biggest impact on your life. So you may actually have more than one diagnosis. So you do just need to make a choice about which one is impacting your life the most, and that's what you put as your primary or main disability. The form's then asking whether your disability has come about due to an accident, and if so, whether any compensation is involved. And now we get into the section of the treating professional. So this is where we'll hopefully be able to find someone in your life that knows you well enough to comment on your disability, the treatment you're currently having or have had in the past, that they can also make commentary on whether the impairments are permanent and lifelong, and whether there's any treatment that hasn't been tried yet, or any treatment that might be able to lead to improvements or that could be curative. I just want to get us to the evidence of reduced functional capacity section. So this is where we now get to those domains that I was talking about. Now, this is a PDF form that can be downloaded. So I suggest that you download it and save it onto your computer and give it a name that relates to you, such as first name, last name, access request form, and then a date maybe. And then you can actually type into these sections here. And you could even then email your version to a treating professional that they then also fill in, save it, and send it back to you once they've signed it. So like we've already looked at, we're going through these 6 domains. So they want some examples here of whether there's evidence of significant functional capacity reduction. But then you can see that they go into each domain again. And this is where they're really digging into evidence of significant functional capacity reduction. So have you required home or environmental modifications because of your impairments? Have you required assistive technology? And give evidence of whether assistance is required from other people. So it does that for each domain. And this is really key. This is essential. If these sections are not completed by the treating professional, then they can elect to attach a separate supporting letter if they would prefer. But if they do that, they still need to cover off all of the domains that are relevant and give really clear individualized examples of reduced functional capacity in the domains that are relevant. Otherwise, my assumption is that the NDIS would request additional information. And then lovely little, there's a section for the treating professional to sign, but then they've done a little helpful thing here of giving you a checklist of hopefully what you've included in your access request before you then decide that you're ready to go. So I often support people to submit this via email to the National Access team. And when it's sent by email as an attachment, you can then also include other attachments that are relevant. So they may be supporting letters from other treating professionals, either the one that's completed this form or other people in your life who are treating professionals if you have multiple. And you can also include there a participant statement or a carer statement. And that's where some applicants and their informal supports or carers also would like to make statements around how they see the impairments lead to significant reduction in functional capacity. Okay, well, that's the application form, and that's me. So hopefully that's helped you to get started and think about the evidence that you like to collect and the people you want to talk to about this. But the biggest thing I can say is that when we're looking at applications to the NDIS, yes, there needs to be diagnoses and impairments. Yes, we need to show that they're lifelong and permanent, and that you're under the age of 65, and that you're, living in Australia and you have residency access requirements. But the biggest thing that I see that's essential is then to show how those impairments lead to a significant reduction in functional capacity in any of those domains that relate to you. And that's often where the time and the cost may come in around your time and the treating professional's time. Okay, look forward to meeting you when you're on your journey and on the path of this process. Thank you.